Well, welcome back, everyone. This is episode 12, I think, of the ever flowing and going thing. Sometimes I'm not too linear, and time does weird things when we're in these creating these shows and sharing together. But it is a high point of my week to get together with my brothers here and talk about this stuff and share. And the last time we're talking about a lot of things. We're talking about different stages of development that go from, in a real simple version, from egocentric, ethnocentric, world-centric, cosmocentric, and how those are reflected in the process of the journey. Also, you brought up the last time, I didn't get to talk about it, but here we go. One of these different levels, but you can see here there's different lines that are different stages of development. So you may be at this real high level intellectually, the second tier integral level, but emotionally you haven't done any work. So you're really down in the basement. Yeah. And that's actually where Don Beck and Ken Wilber kind of clash. Don kind of said there was just kind of one mega line and that's all that really mattered. And Ken said, no, it's more complex than that. Unfortunately, I think it is. I'll have to go with Ken on that one. There is complexity.
Me too.
And that's why when we talk about working the four basic capacities or line, the body, the mind, the emotion, the shadow stuff, and the spiritual, that all of them have to be pretty much at a like an equalizer, pretty much at the same level, not perfectly, but pretty much alignment. Because if there's too much, one is too down. If, like I said, if your intellect is way higher than your emotional development, just going to cause pathology and problems. And I think that kind of problem can actually be one of the feeders of addiction. There's a lot of complexity there. And thanks for bringing up. And of course, you were talking about shame. And I wanted to say one thing about that. In my years of experience of working in the wilderness and recovery programs and listening to people's stories with boys or young men and young women, when I would ask the young women about it, and these were programs that were dealing with addiction. Were you ever, did you ever have sex when you didn't want to have sex? Was there anything? And it's like 100% almost all the time, and that's, and the boys too. You think it wouldn't be as much with guys, but man, it's really prevalent. And the problem is when that's done to you, and I emphasize done to you as a child, you take it on, you feel the guilt of it as if it's your fault. Yeah. And that self-hatred just builds up and becomes this toxic generator of self-hatred, constant stress, and leads to relapse, and also leads to the miracle release that drugs and alcohol provide in the early, in the beginning stages of it. Finally I can stop feeling the pain and the shame and the self-hatred for a while, and it's relief to that. So if we're going to have a stable sobriety and you're going to have to deal with that stuff. Yeah. And talking therapy is good, but it ain't enough. And we'll get into that more and more as this conversation continues. So I just want to kind of summarize from our last what we were doing. And Bob, so appreciate what you put out there. And anyway,
image just came to my mind as you were talking. Thank you, John. Carl Jung made a distinction between different energies, solar energies and lunar energies. He certainly didn't invent this. This is part of every traditional culture. But it just occurred to me, kind of a new way for me to think of it as I was listening to you talk about those four essential lines, is that, and I'll tie it in personally to the story I just shared with you, which is my story, is that I really accentuated the solar, and it came from a family where this was the case. And so the intellect got very developed for me, and spirituality got very developed, but they weren't linked to the accompanying lunar. And with lunar, I would connect body/sexuality was not as developed, and how that connects to morality. And also emotions and shadow work. That was not an emphasis in my growing up. It wasn't an emphasis in my development right through middle adulthood. It wasn't sufficient. And so it's as if I focused like Icarus. I focused on the sun at the expense of remembering that there's the lunar or land or earth below. And that's been the work of the last 10 years, is to somehow re-access and integrate the lunar and have a full-bodied morality, a full-bodied spirituality, a full-bodied intellect. I like the way that Rumi talks about body intelligence having at least as much importance as cognitive intelligence.
Yeah.
And that's been my compensation. And I honestly think that the drug using and the getting high, et cetera, it was a way, it's like a poor form substitute. If I'm out of touch with the lunar, well, I can just get fucked up and I can meet the moon tonight. And I did a lot of that. And I don't think that that's all that unusual. That certainly is my story. And the twist in my story is that I would interpret that lunar visitation as being high-minded spirituality, and I didn't realize that I was compensating for a bunch of unmetabolized material. So it took stopping the drugs before I'd get enough of a biological foundation to actually begin doing some authentic, really transformative shadow work, and to redeem the morality that had gotten so curtailed. So some integration of solar and lunar comes to mind as I listen to you, John.
Yeah, and the body wisdom, you say masculine, feminine, the solar being the masculine, or being the left brain, the analytical, and that's all wonderful. However, there's another half, the other brain, the right brain that's a more intuitive, more embodied, and you have to bring those things together and get those into balance. And in our culture, our Western culture, there's been, and not to mention academics, there's been so much emphasis on the solar. And when you get out of balance, things happen. The bicycle wobbles and you crash, and you have to bring that back. So
it's Eros and agape, that Eros reaching out, striving, climbing, raising, growing, and the agape, the nurturing, bringing it back in together with self-compassion, self-love, the more often associated with feminine, not female, but feminine typology, at least, which is something that we will explore in depth in a future episode as well.
I'm an example of the menu not being the meal, you guys, is that I taught for years at the graduate level, teaching what you just talked about, Doug, and what you've been talking about, John. And so I taught about the virtue of integrating apparent opposites, including sexual gender archetypes and typology. And so I was like the poster child for talking about it. I talked a lot about the menu as the meal ate my lunch. And so that the models that we're talking about are instructive and elucidating. But John, I know that to me in my life, you're the exemplar of this. Without practice, it's just a menu. And the practice had to be full-bodied. I was engaged. I mean, I just had somebody ask me this yesterday in the treatment program. These are people very early in recovery, most of them from heroin and methamphetamine addiction. And some of them are very spiritually developed in terms of a lot of history of meditation, et cetera. And somebody asked me this question yesterday, and I said, what I noticed is that once I got sober, I had created these 25 or 30 years of grooves of meditation. It isn't like that wasn't accessible. As soon as I got my mind clear and began meditating, it's a little bit like muscle memory. John, you work out. If you miss a few months, you'll lose some of your muscle. So you come back and you're buff within like a week.
But okay, we're back on, game on.
It's like that around spiritual practice for me, but I really needed to incorporate a full-bodied spiritual practice. And it wasn't like I was ill-served by the meditation. It was partial, not enough.
Yeah, and when you were talking about your story last time, I was just really moved by, you were a very sincere guy. You were a sincere drunk. I mean, you were you were really thinking you were finding your way, and you fell on your face, and that is every wisdom story.
John, your chapter in your book, or maybe it's a chapter in my book, and I think it's derived from yours. It is a chapter in my book derived from you, John, about the best and the brightest. The last chapter, the working last chapter of my book is on the best and the brightest. Is that there are plenty of people that have gotten into addiction that don't represent the best and the brightest, unless we look at it spiritually, and I think it's very possible to look at all of us as having the elite, the best and brightest in us. But there are a lot of really creative, really bright, really sincere people that have gotten really trashed by addiction and have died owing to it. And it's been humbling for me, for sure, because my sincerity faked me out. That's for sure. Faked me out. I wasn't trying to fake anybody out. It faked me out. Having said that, I really do know my heart, and I know the heart of a lot of people that have gotten horribly addicted to drugs or behaviors or whatever like that. I really agree with you. If you've got a sensitive soul, you're at risk for being taken out. All the more reason to have a full-bodied practice. And I feel like I'm an example of that. I'm not without sin. I'm not without limitation. I'm not without meanness, but I know where my primary center of gravity is. And it informs my working with with the addicts early in recovery that I work with now reminds me of Mother Teresa in the streets of Calcutta, where she would look at the eyes of the lepers that she was treating, and she says she saw Jesus in every one of their eyes. And I would aspire to that, but I guarantee you, when I look at addicts, I don't stop by looking at their scabs and their hair loss and their blank eyes, because somewhere inside of there is a John or a Doug or a Bob that's a good person, and that's who I want to speak to. And I am that as an addict, and shame would have gotten me to forget that. What happened for me around my own addiction is I began to look at myself through the eyes of those that would stigmatize me, that would judge me, real or imagined. A lot of it was imagined, and some of it's real. People, it's like, you are the scum of the flippin' earth for being an addict. But I internalized that and began looking at myself that way. So I stopped seeing Jesus in my own eyes. And that's the worst crime of shame, it seems like, is that I lose that spiritus. And with that, then I'm a goner. And I've regained that. I've regained that in sobriety. I've regained that in recovery. And I want to give that to others. That's that's primary meaning for me, is to give that to others.
And Bob, but you also, there's a certain brokenness to you. And it's really beautiful. I had a teacher once to tell me, he said, you have a lot of good pain. And I was like, what? And, and it's like, it's there, and that from that brokenness, from that suffering, it just shows in you, how you present and how you communicate and how you are as a human being. You have compassion,
Thank you,
for others. And most of us have to really suffer, to achieve that. And
I know I shared this before. Thanks, John. I know I shared this before, and then I want to ask Doug for his input here. I shared this poem recently, even from Rumi. It's just a single line where he says, "A prophet's soul is especially afflicted, because it has to become so powerful." Mm-hmm. And if I look at power in the way you just said it, John, it's a kind of depthful power that's the opposite of arrogance. It's like a humble power. I like the way that a Tibetan book calls it ruthless compassion. It's ruthless. It's not pretty, and it's got lots of scars and this and that, and it's compassionate. It's born out of suffering. It's born out of Jesus was the man of constant sorrows, the suffering servant, who was acquainted with grief. Those images of the archetype of wholeness across all traditions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, and so on. Every one of them points towards having deep acquaintanceship with the valley of the shadow of death. And if it doesn't take us out, it nearly took me out. It probably nearly took you out, John, you too, Doug. If it doesn't take us out and we can find resource like what we're talking about in being here, it's like what we have to give to the world is unbelievable. I could not believe that this would be my fate. I'm so grateful it is my fate.
Quote here that I wanted to share from Anthony DeMello, who is
he's a Jesuit.
He's a Jesuit, yes. A really interesting thinker, and shaped some of my early notions of understanding what spirituality could be, when before my understanding of spirituality was much more closely related to a blue or amber mythic, literal understanding. Anthony DeMello kind of showed me the potential and the possibility there. He says, very much related to what you were talking about, Bob, that people who want a cure, provided they can have it without pain, are like those who favor progress, provided they can have it without change.
That's a great quote.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. I sure as hell tried it without pain for a long time, you guys. Haven't got time for the pain, Carly Simon.
Well, and what we want to do is change, ignorant pain into noble pain. We learn to work with the darkness. So we learn to work with our brokenness, with our shadow stuff, and at a certain point. And by the way, I want to let everybody know you can get a free meditation, deep delta, which is a part of this thing, and it is a fantastic track. And so that'll give you a entry into deep contemplative meditation and prayer if you're not already there. And if you're already there, you'll feel it even more. I mean, it's not a lot of the people that use iWakes Up are very advanced meditators, and they can really feel the power of this. So so that's one of the tools. And once we get into practice, every subject we have here seems just about infinite. you know.
Yeah.
Every door that's open, we could just completely go into it. So I want to give just a humorous antidote, because we've been so heavy for a while, and Pam and I have a friend who's Father Edmund Grace, who comes from Dublin and spends, I don't know, 6 weeks with us every summer, something like that. He was up in the meditation room meditating, and we have a meditation room upstairs, and he had his cup of coffee next to him. And Lucy, my dog, you know, she has full access, and she walks in and she takes a big slurp out of his coffee cup. And he goes, "All right, that's a bloody enough." No, he said, "I said, no, I'm not a bloody Franciscan." It was so beautiful. Lucy's like, "Oh." So anyway, yeah. So I'm not a bloody Franciscan. I'm pretty much a bloody Franciscan.
John, I want to riff off of that last statement about a bloody Franciscan, and this is not meant to be unfair to Franciscans at all. Just to riff off of that metaphor, is that's one of the things that's in common here as we talk about addiction. Is we're not bloody Franciscans. We're not, we've had our asses kicked, and we will kick asses, and we have done that.
Yes.
And it's like, I liked how you talk, it's like a noble suffering. Someone once equated suffering with consciousness, it's only through suffering that we gain consciousness. But you have to modify that. It's only through conscious suffering that you develop consciousness. It's quite possible, in my experience in psychology, is that most people, generally speaking, experience suffering unconsciously, and it doesn't build anything. Yeah. It just builds a traumatic state of mind out of which you begin to operate with your personality. So we're not good Franciscans. The Icelandic singer Björk says, "I'm not a fucking Buddhist," which is to say, she is. Right.
Or one of my favorite guys, I keep forgetting the name. He's a New York Jewish guy who has a Buddhist name. He's one of my favorite Buddhist teachers, and I'll give him credit. But he goes, let's just the hell with Buddhism. Let's just be let's just be Buddhas, And I was like, oh, that totally makes sense to me. Let's not make a religion of waking up. Let's just wake up.
One of the things that happens working with addicts, and it's the addict in me, it's the addict in you, Doug, it's the addict in you, John. Hope I can use that in a general sense. It's like one thing is about working with ourselves and working with others in and around addiction and recovery is that cute little categories of Buddhism or Christianity or integral or a recovery, they don't hold water. It's like, you try to present that to somebody, John, you know this from years of experience. You try to present some model that doesn't have heft, that doesn't have depth to be able to contain dark shadow. It'll burn up like a tissue in a flame. You've got to find a deeper standpoint, and it's a deeper Franciscanism that we're looking for.
Yeah. Like Francis, he's a big hero of mine, by the way.
Yeah.
And one point I just want to make, that I mean, like you were saying, Bob, in your story, not only my brother who committed suicide was also addicted to pain medication because he was so depressed and he was taking this stuff, and that eventually led to his death and his demise. But the stuff that we're talking about as we begin to move into, what is the practice of integral recovery, is that it's not just for addicts, so-called addicts, it's for all of us. We all suffer, man. We all lose our way. We all forget who and what we really are. We all suffer from whatever stories that came out of our childhood or in the world or the suffering around us. I mean, this thing that we're advocating is not just for addicts. It's just the addicts were the squeaky wheel that got the attention in this case because it's just so dramatic. But every human being needs to have a practice that keeps their body strong, that keeps their minds healthy, that lets them deal with their emotions and their pain, and not only their personal stuff, but just to be alive when there's so many humans suffering in past, present, future, all of that stuff, and contain it in an expansive, almost infinite level of consciousness and mindfulness and ground of beingness, if you will, God, if you want, use it that way. And you've got to tap into that. And I think addiction is truly an attempt for depth among many people. Some people it's not. I mean, there's all kinds of, just like as we get into types, I think different types use drugs for different reasons, but in many cases, because we live in really shallow, often, surfacey society, it's the depth where is where we find the connection, the healing, and the inspiration and meaning that it flows out and covers the whole world with its brilliance, and if you just live on the surfaces, after maybe in the early stages, it's all fun and games, it's all going good, whether you're talking about drugs, you're talking about sex, you're talking about egocentric careers or whatever it might be. But as the soul begins to develop, that stuff becomes very, very unsatisfying. And with the fires of addiction, man, the pain goes up so much and you get down to the bottom more quickly than it might be if you weren't using drugs. So in some ways it could be, who was it that said it was, the poet who did the English poet, he said that the road of wisdom is through
Blake.
Yeah, Blake, is through the something of excess, and for those of us who've come through, and a lot of us don't make it, there's a hell of initiation addiction. A lot of us die, and a lot of us don't. So anyway, there it is.
But this deep transformational work that we're talking about here and that we're attempting through integral recovery practice is not easy. It's not an easy road. And even people in their normal lives in AA talk about the normies. even people who could very much benefit from doing this kind of work often don't have the motivation to undertake it or to stick with it without some kind of powerful catalyst. And addiction sure as hell is one. There are plenty of other things that can provide that catalyst to push a person into the transformational work. But in that way, I feel that my addiction made me lucky in a way, or at very least, I won't go so far as to say that I was lucky to be an addict, but I am grateful in retrospect for the push it gave me to pursue the development of myself that otherwise I would not have had the incentive to undertake. And I continue to learn from it, continue to grow too. I just recently celebrated my 4-year sobriety anniversary and continue to deepen and appreciate my understanding, continue to grow and continue to work through the things. I don't think there's an end to it. In integral stages, we're talking about second tier, and then you move into third and fourth tier, and it never ends. Ken Wilber says in Sex Ecology, Spirituality, he talks about it's turtles all the way up and turtles all the way down. We're talking about pull-ons at this point, but it never ends is the point, and I'm just grateful to be on the journey. It occurs to me as I'm saying this, too, that one of the real dangers, one of the pitfalls people can fall into, and certainly I went through this for a period too, is the tendency to get lost in the search, always looking for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and never sticking with any particular practice long enough to see the results from it. I heard it said, and I'm not a programmer, by the way, but I heard it said in relation to learning a program language that it doesn't really matter which one you choose to learn, but learn one and learn it well, and it makes the other stuff easier, as opposed to, dabbling here and there and putting in bits and pieces of everything. You go deep, and then you can go wide with a much broader understanding, because you see the way the concepts translate. It applies to spirituality too. I was lost in the search for a long time. I dabbled in a lot of different things and took bits and pieces from all of them, but it wasn't until I committed to a path long enough to see results from it and the benefits from practicing a particular system of meditation consistently for years, that some of the other things started to make sense, and I could enrich my own understanding and experience from the wisdom that these other traditions had to offer.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's so important. I mean, it's hard because some practices just don't work. You can sleep on crystals. I don't think it's going to do much. I'm sorry, you crystal lovers out there, but I went through that search too. As it got out of, kind of went to postmodern, sniffed around in the New Age stuff, and I was in the wilderness a lot, which as a guide and spent a lot of time, is very transformational for me. And I also had a mentor and an elder who was a Native American medicine man and elder who was great. But he was a big soul. I mean, I don't think he was purple at all. I think he was way up there. He had a universal heart. And one of his, because there's a lot of racism, interior racism in Native American cultures, because they've been so put down. And then there's, of course, the white folks have certainly not covered ourselves in glory. It's how we treated our the original inhabitants of the land, etc. But in the sweat lodge, he would say, hey, all our blood is red, so let's just get over ourselves and pray together. It's just like, yeah, thanks, grandfather, right on. So anyway, so there's some practices that really work. And the same thing, I was a haunted mystic. I had my first big spiritual thing when I was 11, and then some were drug-induced, some weren't, but there was always a sense of a greater, higher power, greater consciousness that I tapped into, but I wasn't able to stabilize it for too long, and I didn't have the eldering, when I had this big, the Christian opening as a kid. I was, member of the Catholic Church, and there was no guidance there. If I'd have, at 11, if I could have read St. John of Cross or something, maybe I would have figured it out, but it wasn't, the priests weren't, anybody was pointing me there. So and sometimes that journey, the journey is difficult, and it's supposed to be freaking difficult. One of my favorite stories is Parsifal, right? Von Eschenbach's version of it. I guess it was 12th century or 13th century. And it's a story of this young fool that leaves home, goes out, leaves his mom and goes out into the world and has some initial successes and then falls on his face. Oh, and he finds the Grail castle when he's a young man, all right? He has this experience, the castle, then he doesn't ask the right question and it disappears, boom. Then he goes from misadventure to misadventure to misadventure, falling on his face and doing all these things when he finally comes back to the Grail castle. And he finds it again after being, a beat up guy. And I think there's something, almost essential in the spiritual journey. And boy, if addiction is not, the knight going off the wrong path and losing the Grail and, getting bewitched and all the things that happen in these adventure stories. But he comes back and he goes, he asks the question, whom does the Grail serve? He finds this cup, and the Grail is like Jesus's blood, and there's all these things, or the ultimate truth of probably the more esoteric meaning of what it means to be a human being and what that is, that we are the Grail. He asks the right question, and then the story ends. There's no resolution. It doesn't answer whom does the Grail serve, but I think that's a fantastic medicine question. Medicine in the Native American sense, not in like throw some oxycodone on it, but in a healing sense is whom does your recovery serve? Once it's like, yeah, I just don't want to die, in a ditch or in a back alley or something and just lose everything that I care about. But beyond that, or maybe even that's the Holy Grail in the moment. I don't want to abandon my children. I don't want to abandon my family. I don't want to abandon my country, my calling, whatever it matters. And then as the journey progresses and it deepens with the practices over time and service and all the stuff that makes up a viable, true, spiritual, emotional, integral path, if you will, the constant reflection, whom does the Grail serve? What is this about? And I think that is an infinite question, and it keeps deepening and expanding over time and on the journey, on the road.
Let me riff off of that for just a second, John. Thank
Certainly.
you. I think it's implied in what you were saying. Whom does the Grail serve has a different answer at each of those levels that we talked about in our 10th and 11th podcasts. And I'll tie it into personally. And Doug, I'd love to hear from you around this too. And I do want to hear your story, Doug. If not this session, another session, I'd really like to hear your story. Is that I thought that my addictive behaviors were serving the Grail of the green level, or even maybe of the integral, the second tier level, but certainly I felt like this was in service of the gods, really from a very green, kind of Jungian informed spirituality, kind of Jung meets Buddha type of spirituality, and was surprised by it. It's a friend of mine in Refuge Recovery recently said there was a big bait and switch. You got sold a bill of goods, and all of a sudden, oh, that isn't what I signed on for. And in fact, the Grail that I thought was serving higher purpose was really serving kind of the red Viking. I mean, that even puts down Vikings. I don't even want to do that. It was just like really base red, even purple and beige kind of instinctuality and so on. And so that the first move of moving towards sobriety, first move in recovery is moving towards literal sobriety. And that's in service of physical survival. It's just like, if I don't survive this, and it nearly took me out physically, I need to survive that. So the Grail King at that, the Grail at that point serves physical survival. But what does physical survival serve? And the move began to enlarge for me. Well, because the work I do is teaching, how about if my physical survival serves my giving something to others? And so I began to kind of move back up the evolutionary ladder, or the spiral dynamics ladder, to begin once again to reaccess orange and green levels, it seems like to me. And maybe one of my issues with the primarily blue recovery group that I was involved in was that it didn't seem like it pointed beyond sobriety. I mean, there was a lot of talk about that, and the meetings were set up. Our highest value is for the newcomer that comes in. We want to help them get sober. And I realized that I had a real respect for that, but that wasn't sufficient. It began to feel like spiritual milk to me, and I needed meat. And
well,
the meat
yeah,
would be
because it's totally developmentally appropriate. Get your red drunk dragon in there and get into a blue structured group. Oh, by the way, it's not all about you and whacking everybody with your Thor's hammer. You know, it's about service, humility, following the rules.
Yeah.
Here's the book. Do what your elders tell you to do. Do what your sponsor says. And that's all of that great stuff that brings one out of that chaotic, red or below stuff. And that's super appropriate for that structure to be there and to give order and responsibility in a sense of this is right and this is wrong. I better, be humble and do good and examine myself and serve others. After a while, great. That is the foundation, but it's a foundation. It doesn't mean you don't build the first floor. If you just obsess on the foundation, you'll miss what the foundation is for. The foundation enables us to keep building the building. And I think that's maybe because the developmental model wasn't really understood at the beginnings of AA and stuff. They've lost that. So just to add this particular piece gives it a dimensionality and a depth and a true kind of teleological thrust in the whole journey of, what we said, cleaning up, waking up, showing up, and or growing up and showing up.
I'm particularly sensitive to this because of my background in the profession of psychology. I've got 3 or 4 decades now of being immersed in professional psychology, particularly teaching psychologists and therapists and training and supervising and so on. And so it didn't take me very long, and I think I'm particularly sensitized to it, didn't take me very long to begin to experience what felt like an anti-psychological bias in the 12-step environment. And I really like what you said, John, is I think AA and the foundations were built in a pre-psychological kind of climate, certainly pre-developmental. And I don't go to the Bible to read about antibiotics, I don't go to the big book of AA to read about
the Bible contains all the truth. Well, what's it say about antibiotics?
So there's some real grace, I think, in that. But at the same time, I was yearning for, how can I split off my psychology? How can I split off very cultivated contemplative spirituality? When the big book talks about meditation, it's not talking about what I know as contemplative practice. That's for damn sure. And we'll talk about that another time some more. So I'm yearning for more, and very grateful for the foundations that have been laid. But for me, it wasn't a theoretical thing. It was a very personal thing. It's like, I need to find brethren, sistren, that I can interact with on psychological and spiritual levels too, especially as I have a foundation of literal sobriety. Back to the Grail serves all of those levels. The Grail serves my physical sobriety. It serves my developing my mind again after it's kind of been blown out, getting some clear thinking, thanks to people like Ken Wilber. It involves my re-embracing my deep affinity for contemplative spirituality, primarily Christian monasticism and Buddhist practice are the practices I've engaged in for decades, but I needed to get sober to do that. And I wanted something that I wanted the Grail to serve all of those kings.
Yeah.
And I think that the integral map, this integral community that we're talking about, in integral practice, is a way to cultivate. And it's been a godsend for me. And I don't think that integral proposes to replace anything. It's about incorporating the best of everything. John, you're the pioneer of this languaging of it, but I really have felt that. So anyway, in the spirit of the Grail, there's a developmental unfolding for me, for sure, of coming out of rank addiction into increasing sobriety and deepening recovery, where the Grail, whom the Grail served, evolved and continues to.
I will be forever grateful to AA for the pioneering work that they have done, but it's also a model that does not work for everyone. People who had a lot of knowledge of psychology or were unable to accept that blue amber level of spirituality often struggle with it for a long time and are unable to make AA work for them. Certainly I did, and I have seen in a lot of young people too a resistance to the program because of the language they used, even when the return to a blue level group is very much what is needed to continue on their recovery and their journey of development, which is why I'm so incredibly grateful for some of the other methodologies of recovery that are coming to be these days, the Buddhist recovery communities and refuge recovery and smart recovery, and what we're doing here with integral recovery as well, because it provides a different languaging and a different understanding in addition to what is offered and what was offered by AA that I hope a lot of people will be able to connect with.
Yeah, and just props for AA and the 12 steps. I mean, they were the only people doing anything for decades.
That's right.
And if they only help 5% or 10% of the people, that's millions of lives saved, a lot more than the medical profession was doing or anybody else or the churches were doing. So, I mean, they worked with what they had. And I think that by and large, it was a wonderful thing. Nobody was getting rich. It wasn't a big cult thing. The wisdom of Dr. Bob, and they're pretty, I think Bill W. kind of thought about that for a while, but Bob was there to kind of keep him grounded in what it was really about. And so it was a really beautiful uprising of the human spirit to develop a source of support and healing for something nobody else was doing, to lock them up, put them in prison, or just let them die on the streets. They were out there trying. And it's a wonderful, a beautiful story. And we've learned a lot since then, and it's not enough.
John, this is testimony to the spirit you talked about in the lecture two times ago on the steps. It really was a lecture. You needed to present the material, and I really respect that. But when you talk about moving from first tier to second tier, this is what you're being right now, is the embodiment of second tier. You too, Doug, it seems like to me, to really appreciate that which preceded in terms of foundational to instrumental to what comes next. And it gets no more practical than that. There's no demonizing energy here. It's meant to be inclusive. I like how you talk about it, John, is it may not be reciprocal. You talk about if you can tell these stories. You talk about, I hate to even say it, but you talk about like if you're a Mormon and you come to a meeting, I'll let you tell the story. There's a way that there may not be reciprocal appreciation for your inclusivity. John, do you want to tell that story? I love that.
Well, no, I just, you can do Catholic, Mormon.
It doesn't matter.
I live in Mormon country and I really, really, I love my neighbors and appreciate them very much and have some deep friendships over the years. But, you go to a Mormon church, and this is any, amber or blue level, religion where there's only one way. And you go in and say, hey, everybody, God bless. It's an awesome day. And I've been here with you 30 years and I just adore you all. And it's been great 30 years, but I really feel called to go study Buddhism. So I'm just saying goodbye for, goodbye. And it's like, oh, brother, we love you. Thank you so much. And like, you are so fucked. You're going to burn in hell so bad. It's going to really hurt, Yeah. And so, so that's one of the things where you get kind of that kind of fundamentalist feel to thing or culty thing. And AA can be like that too. And sometimes AA just grabbing somebody by the pants and hauling them back in because they know he's going to go kill themselves. And the other hand, it can be this, there's no noble way. There's no graceful way to move on. I really got it. Thank you so much. But I need to go and do this other thing now to complete my growth. And so there's both of those things, but it has to be okay to leave.
To put it in spiral dynamics language, blue never looks at orange as better than or desirable. It looks at it as less than blue.
It's
Orange
devolutionary.
Yeah,
It's going downhill.
Orange looks at green the same way. Orange looks at green and says, how freaking idiotic. It looks at it
Tree hugging, hippie, weak-minded, nutcases.
Not till you reach the second tier, and that's really where the rubber meets the road with this. Not till the second tier do you feel an adequate appreciation for every level that came before, and then a continuing wish to expand beyond whatever your definition today is of integral. Tomorrow should eclipse it if you're really growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no jumping stages, although a lot of people try to do that.
I tried
it. You got to go back, It's like, oh, we have a third floor, but there's no second floor. Bloom, So it all works. And so, and anything, it's just the recognition of that. And also, I want to everybody, if you go to the website, the Integral Institute website that Doug here revived and it's made something really beautiful. Get the book that I wrote, Integral Recovery, just as kind of a primer for this.
Yes.
You really understand. I think in some ways I wrote more clearly than I speak about it. And anyway, it's a great book, and it's not that long. It's a couple hundred pages, but most people find it pretty compelling. And also take advantage of the deep delta meditation track. Okay, get there and start your interior practice if you don't already have that going, because it's a very effective form of meditation. And the first time you use it, you're going to experience some very powerful state changes. And if you keep up with that, you will begin to feel the difference in yourself, and as you move throughout the day in your relationships, it just begins to change the whole story. And that's one of the things that this integral model, the hard work in the daily practice, and the tools to do it effectively, that we bring into this whole conversation of recovery and what it means to be a human and what we're here to do, etc. So,
thank you, John. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah. Thank you, guys, making my Saturday again. And also keep them cards and letters coming, right? So we're going to do some of these things that are live, so you can come in and we can talk. But we love the emails, and we love any questions that you might have, and it gives us something to talk about, because we're running out of things to talk about, quite frankly.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah. No, but
anyway.
Drop us a line on the Facebook group. Like John said, come and join us there on the Facebook group. If you visit integralrecoveryinstitute.com, not only can you pick up your deep delta meditation, but also you can join our community there. We'll have links to Facebook group. You can leave us comments on the contact page, and lots of good ways to start getting connected with this growing community. We're going to start doing some meetings soon, and we'll have more to follow. All of it's there on the website.